You're about to hear a story that might stay with you long after it ends. A blind girl, a feared wolf, and a bond no one could explain. It begins in the mountains where silence is loud and kindness echoes farther than fear. If you believe in second chances, in listening before judging, stay with us, and if you feel something along the way, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow the rest of the journey. The wind drifted through the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, carrying with it the scent of pine and the hush of early winter. Snow had not yet fallen, but the sky bore that heavy pewter tint, like a sigh held too long. In the quiet town of Maple Hollow, the homes stood scattered across the valley like forgotten postcards, each porch lined with rocking chairs and hope, weathered but waiting. The Bennett family cabin sat on the farthest edge of this community, where the forest whispered its own truths and the pine needles crunched soft underfoot. Inside the cabin, 9-year-old Lila Bennett sat cross-legged on a thick wool rug, tracing her fingers along the grooves of a carved wooden wolf. The toy had been whittled by her grandfather from fallen oak years ago, and though her world had always been dark, her imagination illuminated it in gold and green and snow. Lila had been blind since birth, a condition the doctors attributed to congenital optic nerve hypoplasia. But no one in Maple Hollow, not even her closest neighbors, could say she was lacking in perception. If anything, her sense of people and creatures was sharper than most, who saw with both eyes. Lila was slight and pale, with waves of chestnut hair tied in a messy braid that fell over one shoulder. Her eyes, a soft, misty gray, fluttered often as if chasing light that wasn't there. She moved slowly but with certainty, like someone who listened to the world instead of watching it. Her voice was gentle, always tinged with curiosity. And though she often kept to herself, those who knew her spoke of her kindness the way you'd speak of a prayer, quiet, reverent, and impossibly real. Her guardians, Samuel and Mabel Bennett, were her maternal grandparents. Samuel, a retired forest ranger in his 70s, was a tall, sinewy man with weather-beaten skin and hands like bark. His voice was deep, like the trees he once named for a living, and though he rarely spoke more than necessary, his presence filled a room. After losing their daughter in a car accident 5 years prior, Lila's mother Sarah had died instantly on a rain-slicked road. Samuel had grown quieter, sterner, and more protective. Mabel, by contrast, was short and rounded like a tea kettle, with hair like silver clouds and the voice of a hymn. She had a storyteller's soul and a baker's hands, and despite her age, she was still the heart of the home. On this particular late afternoon, Samuel was sharpening a hatchet on the porch while Lila sat just inside the doorway, her hands moving gently over the wooden figurine. She paused, nose twitching. "Grandpa," she said, tilting her head slightly, "it smells like the wind changed." Samuel didn't reply at once. He stood slowly, scanning the horizon, then nodded as if confirming a suspicion. "A storm's coming," he muttered, "and something else." That something else had a name now. For the past 3 weeks, strange sightings had been reported around the edge of Maple Hollow. Enormous tracks in the mud, nighttime howls that were neither wolf nor dog, missing chickens and overturned feeders. Some claimed it was a white bear. Others said it was a ghost. The town had taken to calling it the ghost wolf, though no one had gotten a clear look. But Lila had heard the howls. And to her, they were not frightening. They were sad. There was a brokenness in that sound, a longing that echoed something she couldn't yet explain. She felt it in her chest like the trembling of string on her old wind chime, hollow, reverent, and forgotten. That night, Mabel served beef stew and cornbread as the wind began to hum through the shutters. Caleb, Lila's cousin, had come to stay the winter. He was 15, lanky and aloof, with shaggy blonde hair that always seemed damp, like he carried a cloud above him. Since a traumatic boating accident in Summer 1, where his younger brother nearly drowned, Caleb had become withdrawn, often avoiding eye contact, even with Lila. But tonight, he sat beside her at the table, his spoon idle in the bowl. "They're setting traps," he said suddenly, as if picking up a dropped thought. "For the wolf." Mabel's hands froze mid-pour over Lila's tea. Samuel raised a brow. "Who's they?" "The mayor, Mr. Daniels, a bunch of the men from town. They're blaming it for the livestock attacks." Lila placed her spoon down carefully. "But what if it's not dangerous?" she asked, her voice soft but unwavering. "What if it's just lost?" Caleb stared at her, his jaw tightening, then looked away. Later that night, While the fire crackled in the hearth and snow finally began to whisper against the glass, Lila sat by the window with her hands curled around a cup of warm milk. In the distance past the creek beyond the trembling pines came the long, aching howl of the creature. Unlike the night screams of coyotes or the harsh bark of foxes, this was something deeper, older, almost human in its sorrow. And Lila, without needing to see, understood that she was not alone in her loneliness. She turned her head slightly, speaking into the dark. "You sound like you're hurting." In her lap, the wooden wolf rested still, as if waiting. The next morning, Maple Hollow awoke to find that a horse from the Jenkins ranch had gone missing. Only its halter was found, torn and lying in the snow, beside paw prints the size of dinner plates. Sheriff Luke Daniels, a heavy-set man with bristly gray eyebrows and a fondness for chewing tobacco, called for an emergency town meeting. "This ain't no fairy tale, folks," he said, voice booming through the old wooden chapel that doubled as a town hall. "That beast is real and dangerous." Lila sat beside Samuel in the back pew, her ears catching every rustle of coats, every hushed prayer. She did not speak. She only listened, and what she heard was not bravery. It was fear pretending to be control. Later that evening, as Samuel chopped firewood and Caleb sat sketching on the porch, Lila knelt by the back fence. She held a slice of dried meat and an old wool scarf in her lap. Her fingers moved with the practiced grace of someone who had done something without seeing it 1,000 times. She tied the meat into the scarf and hung it on a low branch near the tree line. "I don't want you to be scared," she whispered into the forest. "I know what that feels like. I don't want to hurt you." Unseen among the trees, something watched. The snow was faint now, just a flurry, the air sharp with cold. But in the stillness of that moment, the forest did not feel dangerous. It felt like it had just exhaled. From deep within the trees, a soft shuffle, a branch snapped, a low breath, and the wind carried it all, straight to Lila's waiting ears. The morning after Lila hung the dried meat and scarf on the branch, a hushed tension hung over the Bennett cabin. The snow from the previous night had melted into a glistening crust on the pine needles, and frost glazed the edges of the wooden porch like nature's careful embroidery. Lila woke early, guided by the scent of baking biscuits and Mabel's soft humming in the kitchen. Yet her mind wasn't on breakfast. Her thoughts reached beyond the walls, out into the woods where something wild and wounded had listened. Samuel was already outside when she stepped onto the porch in her wool-lined boots and red scarf. He stood tall with his back to her, axe in hand, splitting logs with precise, weathered motions. He paused when he heard her footsteps. "Too cold to be out here barefoot," he muttered, not turning. "I'm not barefoot, Grandpa," Lila replied, smiling slightly. She tilted her head. "Did you hear anything last night?" Samuel grunted but didn't answer. The truth was, he had. A low, rhythmic breathing just beyond the tree line around midnight, heavy enough to stir the wind chimes without a breeze. But he didn't want to scare her, not yet. Later that afternoon, Mabel sent Lila and Caleb into town to buy flour and kerosene from the local general store. Maple Hollow's main street was little more than a stretch of weathered storefronts, their windows dusted with frost and Christmas signs half hung. The store was run by Mr. Elijah Mercer, a wiry old man with a glass eye that never blinked, and a tendency to mutter to himself about when things made sense. His gray beard was often tangled with pipe smoke and biscuit crumbs, and he wore the same patch sweater every day of the year, claiming it was blessed against nonsense. "Elijah," Caleb greeted him with a nod as they entered. "Flour, kerosene, and a bit of sanity, if you've got any left," Lila added cheerfully. Elijah gave a wheezy laugh and said, "Kid, you're blind, but you see more than half this town. You're dangerous." As Caleb gathered the supplies, Lila stood quietly by the stove in the corner, feeling the warmth on her palms. That was when a new voice reached her, gentle, uncertain, but kind. "Are you the girl who talks to animals?" The question came from a boy about her age, maybe 10, with thick glasses that magnified his eyes and a mop of sandy hair that defied combs. His name was Miles Thornton, the grandson of Maple Hollow's new vet. He had just moved from Asheville with his parents and rarely spoke unless spoken to. Miles was thin, carried a well-worn sketchbook under his arm, and had a nervous habit of tugging at the hem of his shirt. Lila turned toward his voice, smiling. "I talk to whoever listens," she said. My mom says animals sometimes listen better than people. She's not wrong. Miles hesitated. Can I show you something? Lila nodded, and he placed his sketchbook in her hands, guiding her fingers gently over the raised indentations of the paper. Each page was filled with impressions, pressed leaves, dried feathers, and pencil strokes thick and curved, capturing motion and texture. That one's a white wolf, he said. I haven't seen it, but I dreamed about it. My mom says dreams tell the truth in disguise. Caleb, having returned with the supplies, looked at the sketch and went pale. That looks like the tracks from the Jenkins farm, he said under his breath. Back at the cabin, Lila excused herself and stepped quietly toward the edge of the woods. She didn't go far, just to the tree with the scarf. It was gone. In its place, pressed into the snow, were enormous paw prints circling once, then disappearing back into the trees. No scraps, no torn cloth, just deliberate silence. That night, Lila couldn't sleep. She lay listening to the night's breath, the creaks of pine and distant owl calls, until a noise broke the rhythm, a slow, steady crunching of snow. She slipped from her bed, put on her coat, and crept to the porch. There it was. The creature stood at the tree line, barely lit by the moonlight, but enough that its silhouette glowed, massive, still, and ghost-like. Its fur shimmered white, like snow touched by starlight. Muscles coiled beneath its frame as it watched her. Its eyes, too distant for detail, burned with quiet intelligence. This was no ordinary wolf. It didn't growl, didn't approach, just stood, like a guardian unsure whether to enter a dream. Lila stepped closer, slowly, until her boots met the frozen grass. You came back, she whispered. The wolf didn't move, but in that moment, the wind shifted, and just behind the wolf, barely visible, was another set of smaller tracks, clumsy, uneven. A second creature? No. A child. The next morning, Caleb went exploring near the old quarry, his usual escape. That's when he saw it, a small den tucked beneath an outcrop of rock. Inside, barely alive, was a pup. Not a dog, but not quite wild either. Its fur was pale gray, ears oversized, eyes cloudy with infection. Caleb, frozen in disbelief, watched as the massive white wolf appeared on the ridge above and gave a single, low bark. The pup whimpered. Caleb didn't run. He returned home, shaken, and told Lila everything. It's not alone, she whispered. It was never just about it being dangerous. It's protecting something. The air over Maple Hollow had grown colder overnight, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. By morning, a fresh layer of snow blanketed the ground in pristine silence, softening the world's hard edges. From the porch of the Bennett cabin, the trees looked like they had been dipped in sugar, every branch sparkling under the pale sun. But, beneath the beauty, tension lingered, an unspoken hum in the bones of the mountain. Lila Bennett sat near the wood stove, her fingers curled around a cup of cocoa, but her mind drifted beyond the walls. She had barely slept. The image of the white wolf, majestic and silent, standing in the moonlight, had etched itself into her memory like a song she couldn't stop humming. She knew now, without doubt, that it wasn't dangerous. It was a mother, a protector, and it needed help. Caleb paced by the window, still shaken by what he had seen at the quarry. The pup's condition haunted him, its trembling limbs, the infected eyes, the rasp in its breath. He had told Lila, but not Samuel or Mabel. Not yet. He wasn't sure what they would do. At lunch, while Mabel kneaded dough in the kitchen and Samuel cleaned his old hunting rifle without saying why, Caleb slipped a folded blanket and a canteen into his pack. He caught Lila's hand before leaving. Stay inside. If I'm not back in an hour, tell Grandpa. Lila frowned. You shouldn't go alone. I'll be fast. The snow crunched under his boots as he made his way back to the ridge near the quarry. The sun had barely warmed the air, and his breath puffed in clouds around his face. Caleb wasn't used to moving quietly, but today he tried. The forest seemed to allow it, welcoming him not as an intruder, but as a guest with purpose. The den was still there, hidden behind a curtain of brambles. The pup lay curled inside, its breathing shallow. Caleb knelt slowly, unzipping the pack. He placed the blanket just at the entrance and poured some of the warm broth Mabel had packed for lunch into a shallow metal lid. Hey, buddy, he whispered. It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you. A low growl made him freeze. From above, the white wolf had returned her body a sculpture of frozen strength. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, locked on Caleb with more weariness than rage. But she didn't lunge. She watched. Caleb reached into his coat, slowly, and removed a slice of venison jerky. He placed it between them in the snow, then backed away, keeping his posture low and his eyes on the ground. The wolf didn't move, but the growl faded. Minutes passed in silence before Caleb turned and walked back toward town. Meanwhile, at the cabin, a visitor arrived. Dr. Elise Thornton, Miles's mother, and the town's new veterinarian, stepped onto the porch with her satchel slung across her shoulder. Elise was in her early 40s, tall and lithe with angular features softened only by her kind blue eyes. Her dark auburn hair was pulled back into a practical braid, and her voice carried the calm precision of someone used to handling fear, whether it came from animals or people. She had come to introduce herself formally to the Bennetts, knowing the rumors of wolves and strange sightings might call for her skills soon. Mabel invited her in for coffee, and as they chatted about the changing seasons, Lila listened from the hallway, piecing together fragments. "Have you seen anything strange around your property?" Elise asked gently. "Strange is common in Maple Hollow," Mabel replied. "But I've felt something lately, like the woods are waiting." Before she left, Elise knelt beside Lila. "Miles told me you understand animals in ways most people don't. If you ever need anything, medicine, supplies, come to our place. Or send word." Lila nodded, grateful. Elise smelled faintly of eucalyptus and hay, and there was something in her tone, an old sadness, like Lila's own. That night, Caleb returned, silent and pale. He didn't need to speak. Lila knew the pup was worse. She sat by the fire, turning the carved wooden wolf in her hands. Then, quietly, she said, "I need to go." Mabel looked up from her knitting. "Go where, sweetheart?" "Into the forest. I have to help them." Samuel scoffed. "The wolf is a danger. Even if it's not attacking now, it could." "No," Lila said firmly. "She's only dangerous because she's scared, like Caleb was. Like I was when Mama died." A heavy silence fell. Mabel reached out and held her granddaughter's hand. "You won't go alone?" The next morning, under the rising sun, Mabel and Caleb walked with Lila to the edge of the forest. She carried a scarf soaked in warm milk, a tin of salve Elise had given them, and the quiet certainty of someone who had already made peace with fear. The white wolf waited. She stood motionless as Lila stepped forward, every movement slow and measured. Caleb and Mabel stayed behind, watching. "I came to help your baby," Lila said softly. "I know you're tired. I know what it's like to want to protect something so badly it hurts." The wolf didn't move. Lila knelt and placed the scarf near the pup's nose. "This will help him breathe." Then she reached out, not with her hands, but with her presence. She let the quiet fill the space between them. The pup whimpered and nudged forward. Lila touched its paw gently, then began applying the salve. The wolf took one step closer, then another. Her breath was slow, her ears flicked, but she didn't stop it. Mabel clutched Caleb's arm. Caleb's heart thundered, but Lila remained still, whispering, "You're not alone anymore." Night fell gently over Maple Hollow, wrapping the valley in velvet shadows and silver air. A nearly full moon hung low above the trees, bathing the forest in a pale, haunting glow. The wind whispered through bare branches, stirring the snow like fine dust, and somewhere deep within the pines, a single note pierced the quiet, a long, aching howl that echoed off the cliffs like a lament older than words. Inside the Bennett cabin, the fire crackled low. Lila sat by the hearth with her hands resting on her lap, listening. Since her visit to the den earlier that day, her thoughts hadn't settled. She could still feel the warmth of the pup's fur, the quiet trembling beneath its skin, and the weight of the white wolf's eyes, watchful, ancient, and filled with a cautious grace. She didn't tell Samuel everything. He had grown restless, pacing more often, checking the shed where he kept the old traps he swore never to use again. In the corner, Mabel quietly sewed a new scarf. Her face, framed by soft curls of silver, was calm, but Lila knew her grandmother well enough to hear the worry stitched between each thread. Caleb stood by the window, arms folded. He hadn't spoken much since returning from the den. His sketches now filled half his notebook: white fur, alert ears, massive paws. He didn't draw the pup. That felt too personal. Suddenly, the silence broke with the distant crack of a tree branch and another low howl, closer than before. Samuel turned sharply. "It's coming closer." "It's not hunting," Lila said softly. "She's calling, maybe for help, maybe for us." "She's not ours to help," he muttered, his jaw tight. "She's wild, and wild doesn't care about kind words." "But she didn't hurt me," Lila insisted. "She let me touch her pup." "She let you because she's tired, desperate. That makes her more dangerous, not less." The conversation ended there, but the tension lingered. Across town, on the far side of the ridge, the locals had their own theories. In a rusting barn-turned gathering hall, several men sat around an oil drum fire, sipping black coffee and murmuring. Waylon Harris, a former trapper in his late 60s with sharp eyes and a limp from an old bear trap injury, leaned against the wall with arms crossed. He was tall and narrow, with salt and pepper hair and a deep scar along his jaw, a souvenir from a cougar he once cornered too close. Waylon had once been respected, even feared, but after losing his wife to illness 3 winters ago, he became harder, quieter, convinced that nature didn't give second chances. "The girl's interfering," he said, voice gravelly. "I've seen her out there, leaving things, talking to it." "The blind one?" asked Tom Granger, the local butcher. He was a round man with pink cheeks and a temper made worse by whiskey. "That little thing? She's got no fear. Makes her dangerous." "You think the wolf's following her?" someone else asked. Waylon took a long sip from his thermos, then said, "I think it's watching her. And when it gets hungry enough, it'll stop being gentle." Back at the cabin, Lila sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, her head tilted toward the tree line. She could sense the forest shifting. Even without sight, she felt the hush between breezes, the hush that came not from calm, but from expectation. "Miles said he had another dream," Caleb said, stepping outside. "This time he saw fire, and the wolf running." Lila didn't move. "Maybe that's not a dream. Maybe it's a warning." Caleb glanced toward the woods. "They're planning something, the men in town. I overheard it. Waylon wants to track her, said she's unpredictable." "She's not," Lila whispered. "She's just afraid." The howl came again, longer, clearer this time. Lila stood, barefoot on the cold porch, unmoving. Then something new broke the silence. A response. A second howl, higher pitched, weaker, but undeniably the pup's. The sound rang out, unsure, like a child echoing a mother's call. "She's teaching him," Lila said, her face lit with quiet awe. "She's showing him how to be wild, how to live." That night, Caleb stayed awake sketching. Lila lay beneath her quilts, heart racing. Somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, she dreamed not of forests or wolves, but of fire. Not the destructive kind, but something luminous, spreading warmth instead of fear. In the morning, word came fast. Someone had spotted the wolf on the edge of Jacob's orchard. Several chickens had gone missing, and there were paw prints near the barn. No one saw her take anything, but fear doesn't wait for proof. "She's too close," Sheriff Luke Daniels announced at the general store, his radio squawking from his belt. "We're organizing a team, non-lethal if possible, but if it comes to it." Lila overheard this while walking with Mabel through town. She felt her throat tighten. "Grandma, we have to stop them." Mabel sighed. "Sweetheart, people are scared." "She's never attacked anyone, never even growled at me. She's not the one who's dangerous." That evening, Lila waited for the moon. It rose slowly, casting long shadows across the snow, painting the woods in silver blue. She slipped out once the house quieted, bundled in layers, and walked to the edge of the forest with the confidence of someone who belonged there. The wolf was waiting. She stood half-hidden, her breath forming small clouds. The pup, still weak but stronger than before, rested by her paws. The wolf stepped forward slowly, lowering her head. Lila extended her hand, fingers outstretched, not to touch, but to offer presence. "You don't have to run," she said. "I'll help. But they won't stop unless they see who you really are." Behind them, unnoticed, a glint of light flickered between the trees. A camera lens, a rifle scope, or maybe just a reflection of something watching. The moon climbed higher, and from the cliff above the town, a long, clear howl rang out. Not of fear, but defiance. The winds shifted the next morning, carrying a scent that wasn't pine or snow, but smoke. It was faint at first, just a whisper clinging to the breeze. but enough to unsettle the birds and send them skimming low over the rooftops of Maple Hollow. By noon, a dull orange haze had begun to stretch across the horizon. Not a fire yet, but something close enough to fear. Inside the Bennett cabin, the air was tense. Lila sat on the floor, carving her fingers gently across a wooden shape, a tiny new wolf, smaller than the first, modeled after the pup. Mabel moved briskly from room to room, folding blankets and packing a tin of honey cookies into an old knapsack. She didn't say why, but everyone could feel it. Something was coming, and they needed to be ready. Caleb stood by the window again, his eyes narrowed at the tree line. He had barely eaten since the town meeting. He knew what fire did. He'd seen what panic could destroy. "What's happening out there?" Lila asked softly. "Someone lit a signal flare from the water tower," he replied. Sheriff Daniels said it was just a false alarm, but Waylon and his group took off into the woods 20 minutes later. Lila's hands stilled. "They're going after her. They think they're protecting the town." "She is protecting something," she said. "Just not what they're ready to understand." Caleb grabbed his coat. "I'm going after them." Before he could reach the door, Mabel stepped in front of him. "Not alone, you're not," she said firmly. That was when Samuel entered, rifle in hand. Not the one for hunting deer, but the older, heavier one from his ranger days, worn smooth from time and memory. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was clear. "We go together." The three of them set out into the woods, Samuel leading, Caleb beside him, and Lila following the rhythm of their steps like a song she'd memorized. The snow was softer today, slushy in places, and the footprints ahead were fresh. They weren't just from boots. There were paw prints too large, spaced with urgency. The white wolf had been here, and so had the men. Further up the ridge, smoke began to thread between the trees. The unmistakable crackle of burning brush reached their ears. Not a wildfire, but a controlled burn. Or at least, that was the plan. In the clearing by the quarry, the fire had started low, with pine needles and dead branches. Waylon Harris stood at the edge, a long iron poker in one hand and a canister of kerosene in the other. His coat flapped in the wind, his eyes fixed ahead with the grim focus of someone who had already decided what justice looked like. "We flush her out," he told the others, Tom Granger, young Cody Bell from the gas station, and Harper Flynn, a mechanic's daughter turned bow hunter. Harper was in her late 20s, lean and sharp-faced, with a braid down her back and a hawk feather tied at the end. She didn't speak often, but when she did, people listened. Her mother had died young, and Harper grew up in the woods, learning silence as both shield and weapon. "She hasn't done anything," Harper said now, eyeing the flames. Waylon didn't turn. "Not yet, but she will. You think that girl's magic is going to keep a wild animal from being wild?" Harper didn't reply, but she didn't light her torch either. Back in the woods, Lila suddenly stopped, her head tilted slightly. "She's close." Caleb looked around, eyes wide. "Where?" "I don't see her," Samuel muttered. "I don't need to see," Lila said. "She's scared, but not for herself." Then came the cry, not a howl, but a sharp panicked yelp. The pup. It was faint, but enough to spur them into motion. They veered toward the quarry, boots slipping in the thawing snow. As they reached the clearing, the heat hit first. The edge of the woods was smoking, flames licking upward in bright, hungry fingers. And then, through the haze, they saw her. The white wolf. She stood between the fire and the den, body arched, tail low but steady. Her fur seemed to glow, illuminated by the flames, and behind her, the pup lay curled and coughing in the ash. Lila broke from the others, racing forward before anyone could stop her. The ground was hot beneath her boots, the air bitter. She dropped to her knees beside the pup, pulling her scarf from her neck and wrapping it gently around its body. "You're okay," she whispered. "I'm here." The wolf growled low, but didn't move. Waylon stepped into view, raising the poker. "Get away from it!" Samuel stepped between them, rifle lowered but firm. "Don't take another step, Waylon. She's got no idea what she's doing," he barked. "No," Samuel replied. "She knows exactly what she's doing. You're the one who doesn't." Behind them, Harper took a breath, then raised her bow, but aimed it at the fire. With a quick draw, she loosed an arrow into a burning tree limb above, causing it to crash to the ground and block the fire's path toward the den. Everyone froze. Then the wolf moved, not to attack, but to place herself beside Lila. She lay down slowly, eyes never leaving the men, but her body relaxed, curled protectively around her pup. Caleb ran in next, tossing dirt and snow onto the nearest flames, trying to smother the burn. Mabel arrived moments later with a wool blanket, flinging it over another patch of fire. Within minutes, the blaze was under control. Waylon dropped his poker, breathing hard. He stared at the girl, the wolf, the pup. Then he turned and walked away without a word. Sheriff Daniels showed up late, having followed the smoke from town. When he arrived, he found a half-burned clearing, 5 exhausted townsfolk, and a blind girl cradling a trembling pup beside the most fearsome creature he'd ever imagined, who, at that moment, was licking her cub's ear. He didn't draw his gun. The following morning, the sky above Maple Hollow was a softer blue, as if the mountains themselves were sighing in relief. The wind had calmed, the smoke had cleared, and patches of ash-streaked snow glistened under the first warm sunlight in days. But, within the town's center, there was no peace yet, only silence and eyes that avoided each other. Word of the fire spread fast. By breakfast, nearly everyone had heard that Lila Bennett had walked into the flames to save the creature they all feared. Some called her brave, others called her foolish. And some didn't know what to call her at all, now that everything they believed about the ghost wolf had been quietly undone. In front of Granger's butcher shop, a group of townsfolk gathered, some lingering from habit, others waiting to see what Waylon Harris would do next. But Waylon hadn't come into town, not yet. He was still up in his old cabin beyond the logging road, alone, with a poker leaning against his porch rail and his silence wrapped tight like a second coat. Inside the town library, meanwhile, Dr. Elise Thornton quietly updated the community bulletin board. She was dressed in her usual work clothes, tall brown boots caked with barn mud, olive green pants, and a thick wool sweater under her padded vest. Her auburn braid, always neat, was now streaked with soot from yesterday's fire. But her eyes were brighter, more alert. She'd seen something yesterday that changed her. She posted a notice, volunteers needed, wildlife sanctuary proposal meeting, 6 p.m. at Town Hall. Behind her, Miles lingered near the shelves, arms full of books on ecology and animal behavior. Since moving to Maple Hollow, he had never spoken this much. But last night, after seeing Lila return from the woods with soot on her cheeks and a wolf pup cradled in her coat, he had stayed up until dawn, sketching what he called the moment it all changed. At the Bennett cabin, things were quiet. Samuel sat on the porch with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. His fingers drummed softly against the mug. He had stood beside the girl and the wolf, had seen the trust in that creature's eyes, but he still struggled to make sense of it. "I thought we were supposed to teach her to be cautious," he said to Mabel. "We did," Mabel replied, handing him a folded blanket. "But we didn't expect her to teach us back." Inside, Lila sat with the pup wrapped in towels. It had eaten a little and slept most of the night curled against her side. Elise had examined it gently, confirming the infection was healing. But what healed faster was the bond. It didn't flinch from Lila's touch. It had even wagged its fluffy, uncoordinated tail once, a small miracle in a week filled with impossible ones. The white wolf had stayed near the ridge, watchful but no longer hidden. Not quite tame, not wild anymore either, something new. She hadn't howled that night. She hadn't needed to. Around midday, Caleb returned from town with Harper Flynn. The young bow hunter looked different in daylight. Less fierce, more thoughtful. She had her bow slung across her back, but carried no arrows. "Granger wants a vote," she said as she stepped inside. "A town vote, to decide what happens next." Samuel's brow furrowed. "Vote on what?" "Whether the wolf stays or is removed." "Removed," Mabel echoed, her voice sharp. "You mean killed." Harper didn't flinch. "He's not saying it that way." "But that's what it is." Lila didn't speak. She rose slowly, placing the pup into its crate with care, then turned to face them. "Then I'll speak at the vote." "Sweetheart, they might not listen," Mabel said gently. "Then I'll help them hear." At 6 p.m., the town hall filled slowly but tightly. Families came together, but many sat apart. The room smelled faintly of pine wood polish and old paper. Sheriff Daniels stood at the front, next to the old chalkboard where votes used to be tallied during council elections. He looked tired and older than yesterday. Granger stood up first. Red-faced and loud, he motioned with his hands like a preacher. We've lived in fear too long, he said. We've seen tracks near homes. We've seen our children kept inside. That fire yesterday, that was a warning. Today it's a shed. Tomorrow it's a house. He sat down with a huff. Then Harper rose. Her voice was measured. I was there. I saw that animal choose not to fight. I saw a child walk into fire, and the wolf let her. That isn't instinct. That's trust. A murmur rose. And then Lila stepped forward. She wore her navy winter coat, 2 sizes too big, and her wool scarf hung unevenly where she had rushed to dress. But her face was calm. She held a small wooden carving in her hand, the white wolf. I don't know what you all saw, she said quietly, but I know what I felt. She was trying to protect her baby, just like any of us would. The room stilled. Being blind doesn't mean I don't see fear. I do. I live in it sometimes. But I also see pain. And she was hurting. So was her pup. You say she's dangerous, but I think it's fear that's dangerous, because fear makes us forget how to listen. She paused, then raised the carving. I'm not asking you to feed her. I'm not asking you to let her sleep in your barn. I'm just asking you not to shoot what you don't understand. The silence that followed was long, and then someone clapped, quietly. It was Miles, then Harper, then Elise, and slowly others joined. Even Sheriff Daniels, his hand hesitant but honest. Granger said nothing. He left without a word. That night, the vote passed. Not unanimously, but enough. The wolf would stay. The first true thaw of spring came early that year. The snow began to melt in earnest, dripping from rooftops, sliding in thin sheets off the pines, and revealing beneath it a soft, muddy world ready to breathe again. The sharp edges of winter gave way to puddles and earthworms and pale green shoots poking through the soil like secrets finally safe to tell. At the edge of Maple Hollow, a transformation was quietly underway. It began in the abandoned meadow behind the school, once overgrown and forgotten. Now, under the guidance of Dr. Elise Thornton and a handful of volunteers, Caleb, Harper, and even Sheriff Daniels, the area was being cleared for something new, a wildlife sanctuary. It wasn't grand, not yet, just a fence half-built and a small wooden shelter, but it held a promise stitched together by goodwill and ash from fires survived. Lila came every day. Though she could not see the physical changes, she knew them intimately. The way the air felt different, the way people's voices lifted when they spoke of building instead of burning. Today she sat cross-legged on the dry grass with the wolf pup curled beside her, now stronger, its coat growing thicker and its legs clumsy but eager. The white wolf whom Lila had come to call, whisper watched from a distance beneath a fir tree, still protective but less guarded now. She was large and regal, her coat no longer tangled with burrs, her eyes steady. The kind of creature you didn't tame, only respected. Nearby, Ruthie Appleton, the town's retired school teacher, helped paint a wooden sign. Ruthie was in her 70s, short and round, with glasses that always slid down her nose. She had taught 3 generations of Hollow children and never once changed her hairstyle. Her silver curls were pinned in the same bun she'd worn since the Reagan administration, and she had a way of commanding attention even while sitting. Ruthie had initially called the wolf a dangerous influence, but after watching Lila speak at the town hall, she'd shown up the next day with a can of green paint and a determined look. I suppose every community needs a little wildness, she said, dipping her brush, as long as it's the kind that listens. Caleb worked beside her, hammering boards into place with more rhythm than skill. He was no longer the boy who trembled at every shadow. His drawings had shifted, no longer frantic sketches of fangs and claws, but quiet scenes. A girl and a wolf beneath the moon, a pup chasing butterflies, a town learning to breathe again. Inside town, even Granger seemed to soften. He still grumbled when someone brought up the wolf, still muttered about rules and consequences. But he'd stop slamming his shutters every night. No one knew what had changed him. Perhaps nothing did. But his silence had shifted from suspicion to resignation, and sometimes that was enough. Waylon Harris, however, hadn't returned. His cabin remained shuttered, his porch empty. Elise had sent a letter and invitation to the sanctuary's opening, but received no reply. Harper said he still wandered the woods, alone, more shadow than man. She'd seen him once near the old hunting trail, standing silently, hands deep in his coat, eyes fixed on something she couldn't see. He's watching, she told Lila. Not ready to forgive the world, maybe, but he's not trying to stop it anymore. That afternoon, Sheriff Daniels arrived at the cabin with 2 metal bowls and a bag of dry kibble. He'd grown up around hounds and still wore their memory in his walk. Slow, sure-footed, with a slight limp in his left leg from a fall years ago during a storm rescue. His hands were thick with calluses, but when he knelt to offer the bowl to the pup, they moved gently. "Guess I'm retired from chasing trouble," he muttered. "Might as well learn to feed it." Lila smiled. "He likes the smell of your jacket." Daniels chuckled. Sweat and bacon greaseworks on most species. Later that evening, a small ceremony took place beneath the trees. The townspeople had gathered, dozens of them, clustered around lanterns hung from low branches. No speeches were planned. There was no ribbon to cut. Just people who had chosen to show up, to witness what they almost destroyed. Elise stood quietly beside a wooden post where a new plaque had been placed. It read, "Whispering Hollow Wildlife Refuge. For all things misunderstood." A murmur passed through the crowd as Whisper stepped into the open. She didn't growl. She didn't hide. She stood between trees and humans like something holy and ancient, then turned to look at Lila. The pup bounded clumsily to her side. Ruthie wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Caleb took out his sketchbook, but didn't draw. He simply watched. Lila knelt beside the pup, running her fingers through its fur. "You're home," she whispered. From the shadows at the far edge of the trees, a figure stood silently tall, coat heavy with dust and time. Waylon. He didn't speak. He didn't approach. But when the wind shifted, Lila turned her head slightly and smiled. "I know you're there," she said softly. Whisper lifted her head, but didn't growl. Waylon watched a moment longer, then turned and disappeared into the woods. And just like that, the town that had once feared a ghost now guarded a sanctuary. A place where no one needed to be perfect, just willing to belong. Spring deepened in Maple Hollow, and with it came a rhythm of peace the town had nearly forgotten how to recognize. Grass returned to the valley floor like a long-held breath finally released. Sap flowed in the trees. Birds returned in flocks, their songs echoing through the ridges. And beneath the new green canopy of the forest, something else bloomed. Trust. At the edge of Whispering Hollow Wildlife Refuge, the little wooden shelter now stood complete. A low fence ringed the area, though no lock was ever used. It wasn't meant to keep anything in. It was a symbol, a circle of understanding between people and the wild. Lila visited every day, sometimes with Mabel, sometimes with Caleb, often just with the pup, now a sturdy, leggy creature nearly as tall as her waist, who had yet to outgrow his clumsy enthusiasm. He had been given a name too, Ash for the dark tip of his tail, and the place he had been found, rising from soot and shadow. Whisper, the mother, remained ever watchful, but had grown visibly calmer. She sometimes followed Lila all the way to the path's edge, then sat beneath the pines and listened. Lila herself had changed. Though still blind, her posture had shifted straighter, more assured. The girl who once wandered by now walked like she could feel the heartbeat of the earth. She smiled more, spoke with quiet confidence, and she had begun telling stories, not just about Whisper, but about fear, about seeing differently, and about how kindness could echo longer than violence ever would. One of those stories found its way into a newspaper. It began with a letter. Ruthie Appleton had sent a small article and a Polaroid photograph, taken by Elise of Lila sitting cross-legged with Ash's head in her lap. She mailed it to her niece, who worked for a regional magazine called Southern Wild. The story ran on the back page. A week later, a larger newspaper picked it up. Then a local television station asked for an interview. By the time April reached its end, the town was receiving letters from across the country. Children writing to Lila, asking about the wolves, thanking her for being brave. Some sent drawings. One letter came from a young girl in Oregon, who was also blind and had never met anyone like her. She wrote, "Now I don't feel so different." The attention made some of the townsfolk nervous, but most leaned in. They painted the school's fence, spruced up the library, and added benches to the refuge trail. Tourists began arriving quietly, hikers, conservationists, even a few journalists. Elise handled them with calm professionalism, organizing visits, managing questions. Caleb helped too, guiding small groups on safe paths and sharing his sketchbook with those who wanted to see the story unfold through his eyes. One visitor arrived unexpectedly. Dr. James Mallory, an animal psychologist from the University of North Carolina. He was in his 50s, barrel-chested with a soft southern drawl and a permanent tan from years in the field. His salt and pepper beard was trimmed, and he wore cargo vests like armor. Dr. Mallory had worked with wolves in Yellowstone and studied trauma in captive animals. But nothing, he said, prepared him for what he saw in Maple Hollow. "She's not just bonded," he said, watching Whisper sit calmly beside Lila. "She's interpreting, matching emotional rhythms. That's a level of interspecies connection we don't typically see without years of cohabitation, and never with wolves that were once feral." He asked permission to study the interaction for research. Elise was cautious. Samuel was skeptical. But Lila said yes, on one condition: no cages, no tests, no taking anything away. Only watching, only learning. And so he stayed, renting a room from Ruthie and spending his mornings in the clearing, taking notes from afar. He didn't speak much during those sessions. He just listened. It was during one of those days that the wolf howled again. It had been weeks since Whisper last used her voice. But that morning, as mist drifted between the trees, she lifted her head and sang. It wasn't sharp or mournful. It was long, deep, and strange in its beauty. Ash echoed her, uncertain at first, then stronger. Lila stood quietly as the sound filled the valley. Then, for the first time, she howled back. The sound was thin, childlike, soft, but it carried. And far up in the ridges, beyond the known trails, another answer came. Not a wolf, a voice, human. That afternoon, a man arrived. He was tall, with a gray beard and a coat that had seen too many winters. He walked with a slow gait, one leg dragging slightly. It was Waylon Harris. He carried nothing but a single branch in his hand, clean, smooth, and carefully carved. He didn't speak when he stepped into the clearing. Whisper saw him and stood, her body still but no longer hostile. Waylon approached Lila and held out the carved branch. It was a staff, about her height, with a wolf's head whittled at the top. "For your walks," he said, voice coarse, "so you don't need to guess where the ground is." Lila reached out slowly and accepted it. "Thank you." He nodded once, then looked to the wolf. His eyes filled, but he said nothing else. That night, he left a bundle of venison near the edge of the refuge. He was gone by dawn. The sanctuary had grown roots. By May, the town had changed in ways no one could have predicted. School children took field trips to the edge of the woods. Ruthie began leading listening walks for local seniors, encouraging them to stop, to hear, to let silence teach. Harper offered weekend archery lessons beside the meadow, though her targets now were straw and not breath. One quiet Sunday, Lila sat beside Whisper under the canopy of spring bloom. The pup lay stretched between them, twitching in sleep. "Do you think he'll stay?" she asked softly. Whisper didn't answer, but Lila didn't need her to. That evening, the girl and the wolf stood on the overlooked trail, where the valley unfolded in soft golden light. They stood not as curiosity and caretaker, but as companions. The girl who couldn't see, and the beast once called Ghost. And when the wind picked up again, it carried not fear, but the memory of a howl, and the echo of a story that had become something more. It had become a home. The greatest lesson this story leaves behind is simple. Sometimes, what we fear the most is just something we haven't taken the time to understand. In a world that moves fast and judges faster, maybe what we all need is to pause, listen, and look with our hearts instead of our eyes. Because healing often begins where understanding begins. If this story touched you, please like the video. Share it with someone who believes in kindness, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true, heartwarming tales. And one question for you. Have you ever misjudged someone or something, only to discover later how wrong you were? Tell us in the comments below.